This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. The podcast features conversations with musicians and music industry professionals, all intended to help musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love, make music. Hey, it's your host Robonzo here. Thanks for tuning in. If you're an indie music artist or fan, you're in the right place. Whoever you are, I appreciate you. As a gigging musician and fan of live music, I am committed to sharing my personal expertise with you. I'm also committed to learning about and sharing the expertise of other music professionals, which is what I do here on the podcast, extract that expertise. If you'd like to be privy to what I'm learning, hop over to unstarvingmusician.com and join the community. You'll get an email from me, usually weekly, with tips, tricks, insights, and secrets intended to make your music journey a little better and brighter. I'll never send you anything spammy, and you can unsubscribe at any time. If you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, also known as iTunes. The podcast and this episode are powered by the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs, How to Get Booked and Paid What You're Worth Over and Over Again. It was written by me, and it's available on Amazon, Kobo.com, and one day soon, Apple iBooks, when I can finally figure out how to publish it there. The book is also available as a standalone podcast called the Unstarving Musician's Guide Podcast. You can learn more about the book and the companion podcast at unstarvingmusician.com/book. I'd love it if you picked up a copy, and I'd love it even more if you left a review. All right. Singer-songwriter Tom Meny credits much of his involvement in the Austin music scene to YouTube and Ray Prim, who was recently featured in episode 52. I'm really enjoying Tom's latest release titled Love and Pay, which you can check out on the Spotify or on his website, tommeny.com. That's TOMMENY.com. And you'll hear the track Hi, How Are You from Love and Pay at the end of this episode. We talk a lot about house concerts in our conversation. Tom considers himself an ambassador for house concerts, which we also refer to as house shows throughout our conversation, just so you know. Apparently, I'm not the only one talking about house concerts, though, but it is a topic that in recent months has come into focus for me. If you're interested in house concerts, be it to host them or perform them, we get into it pretty quickly and mention some great resources for you to check out. You can also find those resources in the show notes for this episode at unstarvingmusician.com. We also discuss a connection with house shows and Folk Alliance International. Check out the show notes for a short list of chapters. Hugely inspired by a very young John Mayer, Tom has a killer voice and a giving demeanor, which I love about him. Here's me and Tom Meny. Tom, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's nice to be on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate you. And I appreciate Ray Prim for introducing us. Can you tell me a little bit about how you guys know each other?
Yeah, it's actually a really cool story. Back when I kind of started getting into playing again, YouTube was, I guess it had been around for a while, but musicians were really using YouTube a lot to put up songs and cover songs. So I started on YouTube putting up covers, and then I started doing my own original stuff, and I had a song called Job. Ray found it somewhere, somehow, maybe on Facebook, somebody had shared it or whatever, but he then shared it. I did not know Ray at the time, but I had seen him play and was a fan of his. So he shared my song Job on Facebook, and then he hit me up and said, hey, do you want to come open up a show for me? And so that's kind of how I met Ray, and I opened a few shows for him, and then he would bring me on during his sets, kind of like in the middle of his set. He would just have me play a few songs, which is really risky for him, because I can think of a time where, you know, he's got a 7-piece band, and it's very energetic, and then to bring up a solo acoustic singer-songwriter in the middle of that set, you risk losing your audience and having them leave the bar and go someplace else. And luckily we didn't lose anyone, and that's kind of where it started. And we've been good friends ever since. And he's kind of brought me under his wing. If it wasn't for Ray, you wouldn't be talking to me today. I mean, regardless of the introduction, I wouldn't be of interest to you today because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
Well, that's a neat story. So was that song Job an original tune, and was it one of your first if it was original?
I started playing actually when I was 10 years old. But in between then and now, when I was in school, in high school particularly, I was really big in athletics. And so I really wasn't playing the guitar much, and even in college. And it wasn't until way later, and there's a couple things that kind of brought me back into it. One of them was finding John Mayer on Kazaa, which was after Napster.
Yeah.
I found all these John Mayer songs where he was playing acoustic shows when he was young in Atlanta, I think it was. But this is before I even knew about the pop stuff on the radio. And then the other thing that got me into it was I was watching TV one day, and one of the Austin local access channels, they were playing an in the round set of 3 or 4 local singer-songwriters. And I had heard of a couple of them, but I wasn't really into that kind of music, a solo acoustic and Americana type stuff. And not only was I not into that kind of music, I had never seen an in the round type set before, and it just loved everything I was singing. And I decided to get a new guitar and start singing and doing YouTube videos and cover songs. And then that eventually evolved into me doing my own original stuff.
Was Job by chance about your story where it comes to working a day job and playing music, or what was that song about?
Not really, because at that time I wasn't really playing yet. I mean, I had written songs, but I wasn't really out and about. My first album was recorded before I had really even played an official show. Actually, the CD release was my first show ever playing with a band, and it was incredible. But that song was more about there's a funny story associated with it, but I was just tired of what I was doing. And one day I started a new job. One day I come into the office and I hear that song playing in the office. And I walk back there, and my boss and the main guy of the whole office, kind of like the owner of the company, are watching that video on the big screen in the conference room, and I'm mortified, but they thought it was hilarious. And they knew that I hadn't written it about that particular job because I had just started. So it was more about just me being kind of tired of doing what I was doing.
That's cool. Do you feel like at the time of that video, I haven't seen it yet, I've been listening to your stuff this morning, and I listened to it before I contacted you to see if you'd consider coming on the podcast. But when you look back on it, do you consider yourself, it's probably an obvious answer coming my way, but do you consider yourself as being very good at that time?
I have mixed feelings. Sometimes I listen to that first CD, and things have changed over the time as well. But a year ago or 2 years ago, had you asked me, I would have said that CD was very elementary. But now that I go back, from time to time, I'll go back and listen to it. And I'm actually pretty impressed with the CD, and not necessarily my level of musicianship, but I was able to bring together a group of musicians that really were really good. And so that CD sounds a lot different than the two after it, but I wouldn't say that I didn't think, or I don't think that I was very good, but I will say that the things that I was singing about are different. I may not feel the same way about the subject matter as I did at that time.
So I don't know if Job is included on there, but you're talking about what I'm assuming is one of your first albums, if I can call it that. What's the title of that collection?
That one's called On My Way, and I think it was released early in 2013. It was finished late 2012. I worked on that album for 4 years, so it was in the works for 4 years. The original, I wasn't out playing live, but although I hadn't been playing seriously for a long time, I had been playing guitar since I was 10. So guitar-wise, I was pretty confident. And then writing songs came easier to me, I think, than maybe the next person. But I think that it was a good effort. When I go back and listen to it, what changed was when I originally decided to do one, I would say around 2008 or 9, I just wanted to do a very simple arrangement of me and an acoustic guitar and maybe a stand-up bass and a brush drum kit. But then as time went on and I got more comfortable in the studio, We brought in musicians and more musicians, and my original vision changed, and that was good and bad. But I am happy with the final product.
Cool. That's a nice feeling. I was actually, I realize now that you mentioned the album title that I was listening largely to that earlier today because I just went Spotify and found you I'm like, I want to listen to his music for a while before we talk. And I guess I probably heard more cuts off of that than off of Love and Peso, your 2016 release, which I'm looking forward to diving deeper into. But hey, the songs all sound good to me. I'm not a songwriter, but I really love melody, and I can listen to a song so many times and I'll remember maybe only a vocal hook. I will not listen to the words a lot, but I really love the sound of your voice. Love the melodies. Thanks. Yeah. Good stuff, man. My wife was listening to it with me as well, and she really enjoys your voice. So.
Oh, cool. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I am glad to hear that you made it to the Kerrville Music Festival. I know that you've done that scene before. Were you performing?
No. Actually, this is the first year that I haven't in the last 4 years. So Kerrville is a big thing here in Texas and in the folk and Americana world. You know, I might go to Connecticut and tell someone that of my involvement in the Kerrville Folk Festival, and they won't know what I'm talking about. But a few years ago, they have a thing at the Kerrville Folk Festival, and it's kind of the center of the Kerrville Folk Festival. It's the New Folk Competition, and it's a very prestigious competition amongst people in folk, acoustic, Americana, that whole umbrella. So they have this competition each year where they take up to 800 submissions and they select 32 people. And each year, 32 people show up. And on the very first Saturday and Sunday, they break it up into 2 days. 16 people play on Saturday and 16 on Sunday. And then they pick 6 winners. So this thing goes back like 40 years. And there are some people that have been winners that have had great careers. There have been people that have been finalists, but not winners, that have had even better careers. So I won it in 2015. And when you win, you go on a tour with the other 5 winners. And it's like an 8 or 9 show, house show tour in Texas. When I did it, the year we did it, we kind of took it a step further. So we did our Texas tour. And then we decided we wanted to continue on, and we booked our own tour for New England. And we did another 5 or 6 shows up in New England. And Kerrville kind of helped us with some of the travel costs for that as ambassadors. Mm-hmm. And then we did it again later in North Carolina and did another 3 or 4 shows in North Carolina. It's a great competition. And the best thing is, I mean, you don't have to be a winner, but to get the benefits of it, the best benefits are the networking. And so you're meeting 31 other songwriters who are going through all the same struggles you are, and they're from all over the world. So what always happens every year I see this, these people meet each other, and then when they travel around the country touring, they have people connections that they can do shows with in different cities. That's everything in a nutshell. So every year since I won, I go back, and I've decided that I will go back every year because it's only a couple hours from Austin. So it's not that hard for me. But I don't do the Kerrville norm. There's a lot of hippies, and I love them all. They love to camp, but I don't like roughing it. So when everyone else is camping in the heat, and usually in some sort of torrential flood that happens every year around that time, I'm in a hotel room.
I'd quite possibly be there with you, especially if my wife was with me. But
yeah, it's pretty hot, and you got to be really one with nature. And I'm just not so much. I like AC and I like restaurants, and so I'll go to the New Folk competition, which happens in the middle of the day and ends around 4 o'clock, and then I'll go to my hotel and chill out, maybe go get something to eat and get cooled off, and then come back, because at night is when the big shows happen. They have national acts that play on the main stage, and usually it's a lot cooler at that point, and that's a big draw for me as well. I love watching the main stage shows.
Yeah, it sounds like the connections that you talk about would be really great if you're interested in continuing things like touring and extending your fan base to parts where you may not have otherwise done. And I'm assuming that you may also, in some cases, you might meet industry people that are not necessarily songwriter performers, but maybe are of some interest depending on where you're at or who you are.
Yeah. Kerrville is associated with a larger entity called Folk Alliance. So the Kerrville Folk Festival happens, but then throughout the year, there's Folk Alliance has regional locations. And so they'll have Southeastern Regional Folk Alliance Conference, the Southwestern Regional Folk Alliance, North, all over the country. And those are like conferences where people showcase. You have to apply for showcases. You may not get an official showcase, but then throughout the conference, they have what they call guerrilla showcases, which house show hosts and radio show hosts, and maybe in some cases record label hosts, industry hosts will have a hotel room, and they book a bunch of people to come play in the hotel room. And it's kind of weird. They convert the hotel rooms into kind of a small listening room. They'll move the beds out of the way and put some chairs up, and some of them will provide refreshments, and they try to outdo one another. But what happens is you go in there and you just play a show in a hotel room, and you've got 20 people sitting in front of you in some cases. Sometimes there's only 5 people because it's at 2 a.m. or whatever. But
oh, wow.
What you try to do is schedule some of these guerrilla showcases way ahead of time, and some of the sets are longer than others. For me, what I'm looking for when I do that is to meet new house show hosts and people who do series that are more well-known in other places outside of Texas. But that's kind of the same thing happens at Kerrville. So they've got everyone on the whole ranch during New Folk comes out to the Threadgill Theater where they hold this contest. And I think it holds like 400 people. And you look across the crowd and you'll see a lot of people they have local regional radio shows, or they're small record labels. But also you see a lot of people that are house show hosts. If you don't know about house shows, I know that you and Ray talked about this, but for me, that's the prize for the moment, where I'm at in the industry, right? So I prefer a house show to a bar show or a venue show for the most part, because a house show, some of these series are very well established. And so they'll have a mailing list of people that is hundreds, if not thousands of people. Mm-hmm. And so whenever they do a house show, regardless of who the act is, it's full, because the people on the mailing list trust that the hosts are going to get the best talent. So even if they've never heard of the artist, they're going to show up. So some of these shows have anywhere from 30 people in the crowd. I've played to 150. And some of these people get very, very fancy with their house shows. And they try to outdo one another. Like the one that was 150 was in a barn that was behind a beautiful home in Rhode Island. And the woman who was the host was a chef, a professional chef.
Wow.
So this barn, although it looked like a kind of a nice barn from the outside, like not your average barn where there's horses in it or anything, but a big barn that might store equipment or whatever. When you go into this barn, the inside is completely renovated into a venue. So it looks like you're playing at just a regular venue. Everyone tries to outdo one another, but if it's an established series, the main point is it's usually full. So whether it's 35 people or it's 100 people, each one of those people pays anywhere from 20 to 25 bucks as a donation, and I do quotation marks there, mm-hmm. because house shows have to follow certain guidelines because of ASCAP and BMI. So if it's a private event, it's not publicly posted, the address isn't publicly posted, then it can fall within the guidelines. It doesn't fall within the reaches of ASCAP and BMI.
I want to go back quickly, because I do want to talk more about this, but I want to go back to a comment you made about the Kerrville prize winners. Did you say that the tour that those people that were, I guess, sort of sponsored to go on by the Kerrville Festival organization, that those were house concerts, or did you say house shows?
Yes.
Okay.
Mostly house shows. There's one show at a place called Uncle Calvin's, which is not a house show. That's usually the first one of the tour. That's in Dallas. All the rest are established house show hosts who are also members of the Kerrville Foundation, I think it is.
Okay, cool.
So outside of this tour, those people have national acts that play at their homes. And again, although I'm calling them house shows, not all of them are homes. Like, for example, there's another one that's not exactly a barn, but they built their house as a venue. So the top of the house is a living space. The bottom of the house, the entire bottom of the house, is a venue. And the artists get to stay in the house, and the owners of the house will go to their other home in Austin or stay in an RV. But
that's pretty cool.
It's really impressive and really, really incredible.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know about the connection there. So I also did not know what you were explaining about the guidelines as they pertain to ASCAP and those other organizations. And I knew about the private aspect of it. I've gathered about the built-in audience or the private mailing list that the hosts have. And I thought before we talked that I'd kind of kick off this conversation by saying, I just realized you had a podcast, or maybe I knew and I just forgot, but I saw that you had a show on house concerts and you referenced, her last name's Curtis?
Shannon Curtis.
Shannon Curtis, her book. So I wanted to mention that for anyone who's listening, and I'm assuming it's something that you would encourage people to check out.
Good.
So you did an episode on your podcast, which is called the Singer-Songwriter Podcast, and you have a website by the same name, the Singer-Songwriter Podcast.com. It's on Apple Podcasts and all the other places that you might find this podcast. And in there, I know that you mentioned a book that I should probably mention for my listeners called No Booker, No Bouncer, No Bartender, How I Made $25K on a 2-month house concert tour by Shannon Curtis. I think that's not the entire subtitle, but you get the gist of it. And Shannon Curtis came on my radar not too long ago, and when I realized that she'd done this publication, I thought, well, she would probably be pretty fun to have on the show if she was so inclined to be here. But so you did that one episode, and I take it you dove into her book a little. The things that you have told me thus far, though, about like Kerrville and some of the other things you learned, had you already learned a lot of that, or did you pick some of this up from Shannon's book, or a combination of the two?
I think a combination of the two. The funny thing is that Shannon's book is vital for anyone that wants to do house shows. You can also get a lot of the same information from her interviews that she does on YouTube, but I think that you should also have the book, regardless of what you hear her say on her YouTube interviews. And she's also done a really good podcast for CD Baby, I believe. And basically she tells everything she tells in the book on that podcast, but having that in your hands or having that on your phone is a great resource. And it's like $6, something that's almost nothing.
That's great.
The cool thing is, I think I learned of both things from Shannon's story as well as the house shows in my own personal experience from Kerrville kind of around the same time. What's great is that for the most part, everyone follows the same guidelines when setting up a house show. It's usually a potluck. So everyone eats, then there's a 45-minute set, a break for people to buy merch and chat and refresh their drinks and maybe get more food. And the break is usually 20, 25 minutes, and then another 45-minute set. So you're playing a total of an hour and a half, which is not too bad. And that's really it. And for the most part, there's not kids that are below a certain age. And there's a really good philosophy behind that. But also, for the most part, people give a donation. And a lot of people buy merch. And a lot of people sign up on your mailing list. And that is why, to me, it's kind of the way to go as far as if you're looking for long-term followers and people that are going to follow you to other shows or follow your career or buy your CD when it comes out the next time. I think it's really impressive. And what Shannon's book does is really details why is it important to not have an infant at the show and what would happen if that infant starts crying and what it does for the connection that you may have reached with the audience. And why why everyone should be seated where they can see you and your eyes, that there's not a wall in front of them or a column. Things like that are very important, and the best methods in which to sell merchandise and good tricks about mailing lists, stuff like that she goes in great detail. I highly recommend it.
It sounds like she does, but just to clarify, does she talk about it also from the organizer perspective and the entertainer perspective?
Yeah, she's in her book, one of the things she's focused on is creating more house show hosts and showing the ease of which you can do that, regardless of whether you're in a small house or a huge house or you're using the clubhouse of your apartment complex. And she has some guidelines that you should follow, things that make it worth your while. So you don't want to play to 5 people because it may not be worth your travel to do so. But if you play for 10 people, that may make the difference, right? Because if everyone's paying $20, then that's $100 for an hour and a half show. But you also may gain people that might buy your CD the next time, or they might want to host their own house show the next time. So it's a really, really good resource. I think I try to be an ambassador to house shows as well. Whenever I play one, I try to give just a little blurb of, I'll tell the folks how much I appreciate the host putting on the show that I'm playing, but then I try to encourage them, if they would like to do that at their home, to talk to me or talk to the host there and see how easy it is to do. Some people are intimidated by it because they may be sitting at a house show that's inside a house that's beautiful, right? And they may think that their house isn't worthy, but that's not always the case.
Right. I can't remember when I got the bug, but I've been wanting to host one, and now I'm in a situation where I'm in Panama. I don't know if you knew this, but I'm in Panama in Central America at a beach community, in a really lovely community. You answered a lot of questions I had and also gave me an idea, but because of all the people that I interview on the podcast, we jokingly talk about them coming to visit. And I'm a musician. I began to get plugged into parts of the music scene, and I hadn't mentioned it to anyone yet who I've talked to about it, but I thought, it'd be so cool to just host a house concert, and I could do it with local people. But if people want to come visit and they wanted to play, that could be part of their deal. And for a lot of musicians, that's kind of appealing. So one of the questions that you more or less answered was, what's a good minimum number? What's a minimum number you can pull off that works out okay? And then the other one thing that you said was, whether you're using your home or the clubhouse at your community. We have one of those too, which has an amazing view of the beach. So I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that.
That sounds wonderful. I mean, that's a great idea. I think that would be having people that have done the podcast come in, especially as soon as you kind of get to know more people in the community there that would be interested in coming.
Yes.
For me, I don't like to do anything less than, if I don't think there's going to be 25 people there, then I probably don't book it. But each situation is different. If I know that these people are really like music fans and would really dig what I do, then I'll go for 20 people or something, especially if I'm not booked already. But that would be a great way to get some people to come out to where you're at, because being on the beach, having a view of the beach, I mean, that's beautiful. I would do something like that for sure.
Yeah, I've just been kind of kicking the idea around, and I've had a couple of people that have been on that I've, like, come visit, and they've been threatening to do so. And so, yeah, it might be kind of fun. I'm still getting educated myself, but yeah, so I think, Ray Prim and also another friend of mine who maybe you know through the festival, or maybe not, or maybe you've seen him, as Ezra Van Seal, who's out of Oak Cliff, Texas.
Oh, I saw him. I remember when we were talking, or when we were setting up this interview, you'd mentioned Ezra, and I saw him play, and he was great at the New Folk competition. We don't know each other, but his name is very familiar. I've heard his name quite a bit, just being in the scene.
He's a cool guy. I got to meet him. And you and Ray and Laura Price, who I already know, are giving me, more reason to come visit Austin, just to maybe have coffee or something. Because I got to meet Ezra and his wife for breakfast one Saturday when I was visiting Dallas-Fort Worth recently, and it was just really nice. And it's kind of a cool way to stay in touch. And we were talking about house concerts, and in fact, I texted him after I'd spoken to Ray, because Ray said something pretty funny, but I think that all of his answers lie with you. Maybe you should talk to him again. I asked him, do you market, or how do you market for them if you do, for house concerts? And I think you listened to the interview you mentioned to me, but he said it was kind of like dealing with the Illuminati trying to figure out how to do it. And I kind of understood where he was coming from, because it's not that people are trying to hide it, but they're not publicly promoted events. They are, in a pretty true sense, private events. I mean, they're private email lists, and you enlightened me as to one of the reasons why that is. And I knew of some others, but so yeah, I picked up the phone, I call Ezra, and I'm like, hey Ezra, I wanted to talk to you about house concerts, and he's really into it. He apparently has learned a lot about it. I think he knows about Shannon Curtis's book as well. And so yeah, this has all happened in like the past 3 or 4 weeks, so it's really cool that we're talking about it as well.
Seriously, that is my bread and butter when it comes to, if you look at my schedule, at some points you see that most of them are house shows, whether it's in Austin or around Texas somewhere. But the way I see it is this, and she also talks about it in her book. It's hard to get into house shows, to get to play a house show, especially at the established series. And when I say established series, I mean these people have been doing it for years, and they have people that play every year that are national or well-known acts. And it's hard to get into them. I lucked upon that because I won the Kerrville Festival. That was my in. I think Ray was talking about Illuminati, may have been more talking about how to book them. And yeah, there is some secrecy, or they're very careful about promoting a show just because of the ASCAP portion of it. But it's also hard to get into playing them because they're very selective. They want to make sure that their crowds are happy when they show up with the act. But that's another thing Shannon's book helps with. So it's hard to get into established shows. So what do? You create your own show, and you have one of your buddies host or a fan. And so with that book, you can kind of ease their mind of how easy it is to do. But yeah, there is some secrecy involved simply because of the legality of it. And not to say that it's illegal to do a house show, but when you have, or when you're part of a performance rights organization like ASCAP and BMI as an artist, technically they're supposed to collect anytime you have a performance that is public. There have been some house shows that have been shut down because they were advertising them as public events. And so they'll never put their address on. And it's not to say that you can't go watch a show if you're not on the mailing list. If you hear about the show, your artist says, hey, one of your artist's favorite artists says, hey, I'm playing a house show. Usually they'll say something like RSVP to this email address. And those people will then set you up to come see the show. And I also, if I, as the artist, want to get people in that are not on the mailing list, that are friends of mine, then I just tell them, hey, this address, and they'll get you set up and tell you everything you need to know. But as an audience member, it's easy to go see, even though it may not be publicly posted, as long as the person that you're wanting to see has it on their calendar. Usually it'll just say like private event or house show, and then give an email address.
So it sounds like there are 3 resources that everyone should check out to get most, if not all, of the answers. And one of them is your podcast. And it's not a hard episode to find on your podcast website. All this will be in the show notes, by the way, if you're listening. Shannon's book. And also something else that'll be in the show notes is, which is also in the show notes of your podcast webpage, is the one that was done by the DIY Musicians podcast that Shannon Curtis was on. So to just reiterate something you said and kind of a question, but it sounds like if you're wanting to get into that scene, arguably the best way to do it is to create your own, as you had just said, through the help of a friend who would be interested in hosting, or a buddy. Is that pretty true?
Yeah, so here's the way, this is my thoughts on it. If house shows are typically, at least the ones that I've seen, and I've played many, many, many house shows, and I've been to many house shows as an audience member, usually they're acoustic, meaning it's not like a rock band. For the most part, it falls under, if you're a performer, that falls under any acoustic umbrella. Now, even Ray, who has a 7-piece band, sometimes a 9-piece band, during house shows, they kind of tone it down a little bit. There's one in particular that he mentioned in your episode that he plays with the band. But in cases where I've played with Ray in house shows, it's just been like me and Ray with just guitars. And sometimes they're amplified, and sometimes the house or the space is small enough where you don't even need a PA. There's two things that I think you should do. If you are within that acoustic umbrella, you should seek out these Folk Alliance conferences. For example, regardless of where you live in the country, if you're in the country, there are regional Folk Alliance conferences, like I mentioned earlier. And I would say if you really want to get into shows and you want to get your foot into established house shows, then apply to get into those and try and get some of those guerrilla showcases. If you don't want to go that route, then the resources that we mentioned earlier, the Shannon Curtis book, my podcast, there are millions of podcasts out there that talk about this. Try and get people that are really fans of your music into hosting. I mean, again, you don't have to have a mansion to be a house show host, and you don't have to be a regular house show host. You can just do one. If you just have one artist you want to entertain your friends. But I do recommend you get that book because it does talk about some of the norms and the kind of the procedure of house shows. There are certain things that happen at every house show. A house show is definitely a listening room event, so there's definitely no talking during the songs, but there are opportunities in between songs, like where people might just ask the artist a question. And that's totally not out of the norm, nor is it out of the ordinary. I mean, as far as it wouldn't be weird if you said, hey, what were you thinking when you wrote this song? Or any question, really. I would say if you want to do it and you want to go the route of having your friends do a house show or your fans do a house show, make sure that they're well aware of the standard rules or guidelines. You can obviously change anything you want. It doesn't have to be 45-minute set and then a break and then a 45-minute set. You can do that any way you really are comfortable, but just make sure that they are aware that house shows are not parties. So that's another thing. There's a huge distinction, and it's important. And Shannon in her book makes a big deal about this, but a house show is not the same as a house party.
Sure.
And although some house parties that you have been to in your life or you've seen in movies, there's a rockin' band playing, but everybody's doing drinking games in the middle of it. That is the opposite of a house show.
Yeah.
A house show is a concert, as if you were going to like the Paramount Theater in your town. It's a performance in which people are seated and the quiet. It's a way to connect with the music, and the music is definitely not background music like it would be at a house party.
Yeah, and I've gathered this is one of the reasons they're so fun for artists like yourself. Before we run out of time, there were a couple of other topics I wanted to hit you up with, and one of them we started talking about a little bit is your podcast. I noticed you've just done a few episodes or published a few episodes. What's the status of it? Are you planning to do more?
Yeah, it's funny because I love podcasts. I love podcasts, especially when I'm traveling. So what I wanted to do was something kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Burr, the comedian. Mm-hmm. He has a great podcast, and his podcast is basically fuels kind of people to want to go see him live. So he has a great podcast, and then at the end he talks about the cities he's going to be in next. And so that was kind of my goal. And I originally started that podcast like 3 years ago, and I had probably 16 episodes up there. But for some reason, at some point, I decided I don't like any of these and I want to start over. And I thought, I'm not saying anything that anybody cares to hear. And so I'm always kind of in my own head like that. So I restarted the podcast, and it's actually really hard to do because your episodes get cached in to other servers all around. So I think I've got that handled, but right now there's only 4 episodes. I do plan on doing more, but I wanted to focus on things that other singer-songwriters kind of at my level or maybe newer, things they might need to know coming up. Like I want to do one that talks about how to condition or kind of tell your friends certain things not to do. Like, for example, if I post in Facebook, I have a show that's coming up. You don't want people posting, and this happens all the time, responding to that post saying, "Oh, I can't go because I'm going to this other show."
I know.
And they'll specifically say the other show they're going to, or, "Oh, I can't go because I have a show at 1-to-1 bar on Thursday at 7." It's like they've just hijacked my post to advertise their own. And don't say anything like, "Hey, I can't go because we're out of town." And that's great, and I appreciate it that you're letting me know, but what happens is when multiple people start chiming in that they can't go, then everyone else is going to feel like it's okay for them not to go. So things like that, I want to talk about how to kind of educate your good friends and your fans on not doing that, because I delete those comments, right?
This is funny you're bringing this up because I've experienced the same thing. And now that we're talking about it, I would just say, kids, when you see a post like Tom's or see one like that from me and you can't make it, just click interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about appearances, but other things like when your friends will take a photo of you at a show
Yes.
and the show's not full, and they take the photo from the back of the room and it just shows a completely or half empty room or almost nobody there. The trick is they can still take their photo, but tell them to come up close to the stage so you can't see what's going on behind, right? Whenever I see people do this with other artists, like I'll see someone else's band or someone has posted a picture that they went to someone else's show, and I'll see that it's an empty room. It makes me cringe, because it's not that they're bad and that's why it's empty. It's just that people aren't going to shows like they used to these days. So take your picture, but take it from close, right? So you can see you can see the person clearly, but two, the rest of the people don't see that it's an empty show. And that's another psychological thing that tells other people, hey, if no one else is going, why should I?
Yeah, we need to get this message out, Tom, but mostly to the people that won't make fun of us for being so concerned about these things.
Yeah, that's my mission at this point.
I'm glad that you're still thinking about new episodes. I think you should do it, especially since you love it, and these would be really fun topics to hear about. So here's an obscure one, but are you still a little excited about USBs as merch?
It was really, really great for about a year, and people were buying them like hotcakes. I use it because, one, nobody buys CDs anymore. When cars don't have CD players anymore, and laptops don't have CD players anymore, and desktop computers don't have CD players, it doesn't make sense to me to produce them. You have to have them, like, if you want to send them to radio stations, but it makes more sense for me, and it's cheaper, not kind of per unit, but cheaper per purchase, to buy 20 USB drives and put all of my albums on it and sell it for $20, as opposed to having to buy a minimum of 100 CDs, because it doesn't make financial sense to really produce less than that at the cost per unit. Less and less people are buying it, but I haven't figured out if it's because these people already have all my music or if it's because they're not excited about USB. But if they ever make USB-C drives, which I'm sure they will, because now that's kind of becoming the standard with your cell phone and your laptop.
Mm-hmm.
If they start making USB-C at an affordable price, that would make sense to me as well. That would definitely be something I would do.
Yeah, it's funny. I hear the no one's buying CDs often, and I totally get it, and I'm one of those people. But mostly now because I've moved from the U.S. to Panama, and I just kind of let go of all my CDs, and I was bringing as little stuff as I could so that I could fit my drum set in the trunk of the car. I'm just kidding. It didn't go in the trunk.
Right.
It didn't go in the trunk. But I've had some guests on here that, against the advice of the people that they work with, a few of them will print CDs or print vinyl, and they do pretty darn well with them, because these are people that are outperforming, and that really apparently really helps make for a much better payday. And I don't want, just as a listener, and I've been involved in like a couple of CD projects, but none where I'm like, it's my merchandise at the show, with one exception. But yeah, I guess I don't want to discourage people. But I guess if you already know this, if it works for you, it works for you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And it probably depends on your audience, your genre, and that kind of thing. Wouldn't you agree?
Here's the way I see it, because I do sell CDs as well. I want people to have the option, right? Because you will sell CDs at shows, you will sell CDs at house shows, because if the crowd likes you, they want to support you. But if you put a tracker on that CD to find out, like an alarm goes off if it's opened or played, you would find that, this is just my opinion, but I strongly suspect that it's correct. You would find that 80 to 90% of the people who have purchased your CD have not actually opened it and put it into a CD player. They want to purchase a part of you, and if you don't have a shirt to sell or something else, that is something that they can put their hands on and buy. So I am a Spotify listener, so I'm totally okay with Spotify. I have no issues with that. If I find someone that I love on Spotify, I buy the CD. But if you come to my house, you will see 400 CDs that have never been opened. I listen to the music on Spotify. I buy the CD to support the artist. So I still sell CDs. I buy them at 100 at a time because it doesn't make sense to buy any less than that. And it doesn't make sense for me to buy any more than that because 100, I have 3 CDs. So I have to get 300 of them when I do re-up. And I sell CDs as well. But I have found when I started selling the USB drives, they sold exponentially more than the CD.
That's fascinating.
I've never sold albums. I would love to, but I know that justifying the cost of mastering and mixing an album, because it's not done the same way as a CD. So you have to do it twice, in essence there. Justifying producing an album, I'd have to be higher up on the chain before I justified creating an album.
Someday.
I would never discourage anyone from creating those things, but at some point you have to realize, yes, you have to record, but you don't have to put it on a disc, because at some point the disc is going to go the way of the dodo bird.
Kind of
when
has,
Best Buy stops selling it, Best Buy doesn't sell them or they're stopping selling CDs. Target as well. So when the biggest retailers stop selling them, it doesn't make sense to use that medium. There are going to be other ways of getting your music to people digitally. So that in itself can be an entire episode, what's going on with CDs and how music gets to the masses. But I say if more people are using digital, then figure out a way to get it to them digitally.
You're making me think that everyone needs something like a Patreon type thing or something where they can take donations. So for people who like to support the artist, like you were saying that you do, and have the option to receive something like a CD or some other digital product or what, maybe choose from a store to get that item or not, because I think in your case, tell me if I'm wrong, you just assume donate to the artist if it was easy enough. But one of the best ways you can do it currently is to buy their CD, but you probably would just as well like, hey, I'll give them the cost of a CD and I'll let them donate the CD or keep the CD.
So like I said, I like to use Spotify because for me, it's the easiest way to listen. I'm not an iTunes guy because I have an Android phone, and I'm in my car a lot when I drive, especially to other towns in Texas. Texas is a huge state. When I'm driving to play shows, I'm listening to Spotify, which is Bluetooth connected to my speakers in my car. So my thought was, why can't Spotify have a button that says donate or a button that says purchase?
I was just thinking the same thing, and I'm like, nah, they'd probably, take such a huge cut for they're probably not making any money yet.
I know that more and more legislation is coming up, and there's more advocates now for songwriters and people that own copyrights and stuff. So I'm hoping that there's some sort of agreement that can be made at some point. I know that there was a big push with huge artists, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was all over the TV for a little bit. But it was like Madonna and Kanye and all the biggest names had got together. And I don't know if it was a platform or if it was some other method, but they were doing something to get artists paid more. How easy would it be on Spotify if you're I'm one of the paid subscribers to Spotify, right? So I pay a monthly fee, which isn't much, but still, I feel like I find something I like. Why can't I hit a button and give that artist $10? Or why can't I hit a button that connects me to Amazon to buy the CD or whatever method to purchase the CD? But
I'm with you. Tom, where can people best find you online if they want to check out your music, and I hope they will?
The best place to find me is tommeny.com, and that's TOMMENY.com. And from there, you can listen to my music, you can purchase my music, you can find my shows. So you can find my contact information there as well.
Cool. And you're all over the socials, which I love. And for those of you listening, Tom's got it going on his website and on social media, which made it so easy for me to see things to talk about and probably grab some nice photos for promoting this episode. So thank you for that, Tom. Hey, man, I look forward to staying in touch, and thanks again for being on the show. Yeah,
I had a great time. Thanks for having me. I've got some cool people that you might want to talk to, and I'll just, if you decide, I'll send you some names. But
awesome.
Thanks for having me. It was really, really fun.
Yeah, man. Ditto.
Some people say that I look funny. I must not be from around this place. Got purple skin and buggy eyes, and I'm from outer space, baby. I'm from outer space. Their heads are down as they cross the road. I feel like I'm just wasting smiles. No one says a word at all, and I've been wandering round for miles. I've been wandering round for miles. Oh, where I come from, we won't ignore that you exist. This could have been your worst day. So if our paths cross, I will always say, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Yeah. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? No, I look a little scary. My arms are long, they touch the ground. But I use these arms to hug my son and daughter, and my mom and my dad when they're in town. So if you pass me on the street, promise I don't mean you any harm. That has everything to do with how I was raised, 'cause I got Southern Martian charm. I got Southern Martian charm. Oh, where I come from, we won't ignore that you exist. This could have been your worst day. So if our paths cross, I will always say, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Yeah. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Makes all the difference in the world. Makes all the difference in the world. Makes all the difference in the world. Makes all the difference in the world.
Hey, thanks again for listening. The Unstarving Musicians podcast is edited for sound and content quality by Juan Perez. The intro-outro track is Alarm Clocks, written and performed by Redwood. That's me on drums. Be sure to visit the show notes for this and any other episode for links and exclusive tidbits and offers. You can find them at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. Lastly, visit unstarvingmusician.com/resources for cool stuff that I personally use and or recommend to my fellow musicians and artistic types. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.